It's been an eventful week in Cardiff, with the resignation of First Secretary Alun Michael and the election on Friday of Rhodri Morgan as his replacement. Mr Michael was seen by many to have jumped ship before he was pushed. On Wednesday, the Assembly debated a motion of no confidence, which was tabled by opposition members who are angry at the loss of European development money for impoverished parts of Wales. But before the Assembly could vote on the motion, Mr Michael took the floor to announce his departure.
Pnawn da, galw'r Cynulliad Genedlaethol I drefn. Yr eitem gyntaf o fusnes ydy cwestiynau
questions to the Assembly Secretary for Environment and Local Government, who is here at the podium already to answer the questions. Kirsty Williams, question 1.
Peter, what progress has been made in implementing the housing strategy motion passed by this Assembly on the 2nd of November 1999?
Thank you very much, Kirsty. Well, the interim progress report groups we've established to take forward the development of a national housing strategy were considered by the Local Government Committee on the 27th of January. The work of the task groups is progressing well and the final reports are to be completed in April. The Planning Forum are considering the emerging planning proposals of the task group's work. On the 18th of January, the Assembly endorsed the outline action plan for promoting social inclusion. On the 2nd of February, the Local Government Committee endorsed proposals for the new Home Energy Efficiency Scheme for Wales.
Kirsty?
Thank you, Peter. Will you give an undertaking that future reviews of housing finance will lead to a reversal of the trend which has seen money for housing decline year on year since 1992?
Yes, I'm obviously concerned, as everyone is, to be able to get as much finance and resources available to be able to deal with housing. It's a very important subject, and it's all a matter of negotiation, of course, with the Comprehensive Spending Review. Very important matter indeed. So as we go into that negotiation, that's a matter that I'll be looking at in conjunction with my friend, the Finance Secretary, to be able to see that we get the best possible amount of resources for us to deal with that as the Assembly in Wales.
Janice Gregory.
Thank you, Clywyn. Peter, what action are you taking to combat the problem of rooflessness in Wales?
Well, thank you, Janice. I'm glad you asked me that because actually we've taken a very, very positive view on that. We've taken a very, very positive approach to that, and I'm very grateful to Sue Essex, the Chair, and the members of the Local Government Committee for the support that they have shown to me in this very important matter. I mean, social inclusion is such an important issue for us, and I've found since I've taken up this job that there is a problem of rooflessness in Wales, and I've tried to address that by increasing the homeless and roofless budget next year by 75%, a figure of £800,000. That's positive action to deal with social exclusion. And I'll be dealing with that in the future to make sure that the people who need to have safe, warm homes are able to be helped, and I believe that is the view of all members of the Assembly. And I was rather disappointed yesterday when the Western Mail, I think, gave me 6 out of 10 as far as local government was concerned. So, having said that, let me tell you now, I knew they'd say that, Lois, but then they would, wouldn't they? But having said that, the fact is that they didn't take account of this excellent initiative where we are going to fight and deal with the rooflessness problem. So 2 out of 10 for the Western Mail and 8 out of 10 for us.
Janet Davis.
Thank you, Lewis. Peter, the task groups have reported back to the committee, but it's important to change all their good works into action. And the Assembly, through your committee, needs to set targets that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and time-related. Without this monitoring, the housing strategy can't become a reality. Could you assure the Assembly that when this returns as part of the forward work programme of the committee, that an adequate monitoring process will accompany it?
Yes, thanks, Janet. Very good point. I'm quite sure that my committee, the committee under Sue Essex's excellent chairmanship, will want to make sure that there is adequate monitoring, as they have done up to now on this. In fact, it's only a week or two ago they had an interim report from the task groups just to see how far they'd got before they make their final report. And I think it's very important because I think we're on the verge of an opportunity here to attack the situation as far as homelessness and the general housing strategy that we need to put in place to give Wales the new opportunity that this Assembly believes in. And I will make sure that we have that opportunity to monitor the work that these task groups are bringing forward.
Anne Jones, Sue Essex on this one. Thank you.
Peter, wouldn't you agree that we're very grateful to the people that are making a contribution to this housing strategy from outside organisations, and by involving them in this way, we actually are giving added value that the Assembly promised we would deliver, because what we will get is a much more informed, much more inclusive kind of decision making than we would have had previously.
Yes, Sue, I would indeed totally agree with that, because it's one of the best examples of partnership in this National Assembly that I've seen. And here we've got representatives coming together from the tenants, the very people who count, the people who live in the houses. We've got people from the mortgage, Council of Mortgage Lenders. We've got people from the Institute of Housing. We've got people from the Federation of Housing Associations, Welsh local government. These are all people giving of their time freely to give us a strategy that will be a success for Wales. I've no doubt it will be.
Anne Jones, question 2.
Thank you. Peter, what discussions have you had with Welsh Water regarding the charges for water in respect of people on low or fixed incomes?
Thank you, Anne. Well, my officials have met Dŵr Cymru and Dee Valley Water, actually, to discuss the provisions in the Water Industry Act 1999, which have now been transferred to the Assembly, and which allow us to prescribe in regulations measures in water charging schemes to protect vulnerable groups. I've been kept fully informed of such discussions. Regulations under the Water Industry Act 99 applying to Welsh water companies will be brought forward for consideration by the Assembly as soon as possible. Draft regulations will first be issued for public consultation.
Angela?
Thank you for that reply, Peter, and I welcome that commitment to ensure that vulnerable people in our society may be able to benefit from lower charges for their household water. I am aware that Welsh Water would be keen to adopt such a progressive pricing system should the Assembly approve the statutory instrument. Would you agree with me, Peter, that this, along with other measures, such as free TV licences, the minimum income guarantee for pensioners and the £100 winter fuel bonus, clearly shows that Labour is serious about ensuring that our elderly people do not have to worry about the cost of paying their bills? Well, I see murmurings from the right-hand side here, but it is a fact that under Labour, I'm sure that Peter will agree with me.
Order. This is question.
So will you agree with me on those facts, Peter, that Labour has delivered for its pensioners?
Thank you.
Well, absolutely.
Peter Law.
Absolutely right, Anne. Of course, we are absolutely right. She's totally right. And that's why I'm pleased to endorse that message, because Labour is working on the UK-wide basis, as in fact it is here in this National Assembly, to deal with the problem of vulnerable people. I've just mentioned the roofless budget, and we've got the other excellent initiatives like the National Minimum Wage, Working Families Tax Credits, etc. So as far as these consultations for regulations are concerned, I do expect to bring them forward in spring. And currently some 6% of Dŵr Cymru's customers, for instance, pay via meters, the category who might benefit from regulations introduced for English water company areas. So Dŵr Cymru does not have a policy of compulsory metering, unlike many companies in England, and I'm glad about that, very much indeed. So yes, we need to target vulnerable groups, and I'll be grateful for your support and all the members of this Assembly in making sure we do that in a positive way.
Would it be possible, Secretary, for us to follow the example set by British Gas, and would it be possible for us to consider, therefore, for each one of the water companies in Wales, for them to waive the standing charges on water bills and the other facilities in order to, the other utilities in order to enable people on a low income to pay their way? And would it be possible to look at the possibility of a reduction of 25% for pensioners living by themselves, a discount on the water rates as is available for the council tax at present?
Well, I thank the Leader of the Opposition for those useful points. In fairness, I understand why he's saying them, because he's concerned, like all of us, about vulnerable people. Obviously, it's a matter for us to deal with in consultation with water companies. Obviously, it's a matter we have to deal with in consultation with the public. That's why these regulations will be coming forward for the committee to be consulted on, where there'll be an input from members here of all parties, and for the public to be consulted on. And I'll be interested to hear of the approach there is, and to be able to take those points into account, and eventually we will refine a set of regulations, I hope, that will enable us to provide more help and support for those vulnerable families. I couldn't put any further on it today.
Alan Cairns.
Do you accept that privatisation has delivered low cost to all consumers and a much more efficient water industry? And furthermore, do you accept that it is the windfall tax that has prevented prices coming down to much lower levels than what they should have come?
I'm not responsible for the windfall tax, of course, but I would answer that. I mean, privatisation has played its part in some respects in the service that is given to the people of Wales as far as water is concerned. Some would disagree with that. Some would say that there were things pre-privatisation that are not there now that were in the interests of consumers more than they are now. The fact is we have to deal with what we've got here, and I'm concerned about getting the best deal for the consumer as far as the people of Wales is concerned. So by working in partnership with the private water companies, we can get the best deal, and that's what these regulations, I think, will lead us to.
Peter Black.
Thank you, Clara. Peter, as you know, those properties which are built before 1990 all pay the same for their water supplies, while those built before 1990 are calculated according to the council tax banding system. Is there any way that we can have discussions with the water companies to try and equalise this, so that people living in properties built after 1990 and those before 1990 are paying their water charges on the same basis?
Yes, Peter, thank you very much. Well, it is something I think we need to look into. I think that there's been some lobby for some time for us to pursue that. But I did make the point earlier about compulsory metering, and thankfully we don't face compulsory metering from water companies in Wales, and I would not be a supporter of that personally. So I think we have to take that into account. But yes, where we can make it a more fair and equitable system in the way that you suggested, I think we should consider all options, and I'll be pleased to hear from you and other colleagues here on the way forward on that.
Dai Lloyd, question 3.
Thank you very much. The strategic plan for Wales acknowledges the link between health and the environment. What measures are to be put in place to prevent poor air quality having an adverse effect on health?
Policies for tackling air pollution in Wales are set out in the Air Quality Strategy for England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, which issued actually last month. We are taking the strategy forward, notably with local authorities who have a major role to play in the monitoring and management of air quality. Local air quality management plays a key role in tackling local air pollution issues.
Recognising, therefore, that poor air quality does have an adverse effect on health, does Peterloo intend to refuse his own government's idea to lower the number of particulates in the air and to allow a lower standard of air quality in Wales than in England?
Well, the air quality strategy advises upon the best practicable protection to human health by setting health-based objectives for 8 different air pollutants. The health-based standards were derived from advice given by the World Health Organization and the UK government's expert panel on air quality standards. We are constantly talking to the DETR, who have the lead role on this, as you know, Di, and I think that we have to take forward our experience here and put it into those discussions for the overall benefit of the UK.
Brian Gibbons.
Would Peter agree that many of the areas which have got the most difficult air quality problems are also areas in which have a lot of traditional industry, and a lot of these traditional industries in fact are facing double and triple and quadruple whammies in trying to cope with the various rules and regulations in dealing with this? And while we agree with the principle that the polluter should pay, is there a need for a flexible approach from the government to make sure that the economic burden on improving the economic situation and environmental situation isn't too great?
Well, I think there is a need for there to be a flexible approach, because when we're talking economy, we're talking about jobs, and we're talking about people's livelihoods and standard of living. And therefore, I think there has to be a balance. And I know, in fact, that my friend, the Economic Development Secretary, Rhodri, we've been together discussing this matter with industry and trade union representatives in the past, because it has an equal value to both of us on the economic and the environmental side. So I would agree with that, and I think we have to be careful, but we have to make sure that we do all we can to protect our fragile environment, at the same time making sure the economy is kept stable.
Question 4, Jenny Ronderson.
What steps are you taking to reduce levels of ozone, sulphur dioxide and carbon monoxide following evidence that in parts of Wales levels of these pollutants are rising considerably?
Thank you, Jenny. Well, there are a number of measures to tackle air pollution currently being taken forward. Among these are the introduction of the Integrated Pollution Prevention and Control Regime. This will widen the scope of the industrial emission controls and introduce a requirement for industry to improve the energy efficiency of their processes. Regulations to limit the sulphur content of liquid fuels are currently under consideration. These will reduce the concentration of sulphur dioxide emitted from many combustion processes. Regulations which limit emissions of solvents, one of the precursors of ozone, are also being discussed. Finally, today is the closing date for comments on the draft Air Quality Wales regulations. These set air quality objectives for a range of pollutants, including sulphur dioxide and carbon monoxide. They'll be put before the Assembly shortly.
Jenny?
Your response and that of in the previous question related very much to industry, so I'd like to move on to the contribution of transport in Wales to the increasing air pollution, which I believe is a scandal in the beginning of the 21st century. Now, obviously, because of our limited powers here in the Assembly, we have to rely on the framework of primary legislation. Would you agree that to make any real impact on pollution in Wales, we need a dramatic improvement in public transport? And do you share my disappointment that Wales has been badly let down by John Prescott, who has backtracked on his commitment to a modern integrated transport policy for the UK as a whole, on which we in Wales have to rely?
Thank you, Jenny. Well, I wouldn't share your suggestion that Wales has been badly let down by John Prescott. In fairness, I think John Prescott has done a sterling job in the work that he's done on transport throughout the UK. But basically, of course, I have the responsibility now for transport on a day-to-day basis in Wales. And I think that we have to go back to the situation where we look at pollution of the environment generally takes a lead from the DETR. I need to be feeding into that the views of this Assembly, and I need to be able to see that we are taken fully into account and that we are able to get a full response from them that is beneficial to the people of Wales. Now, we'll be talking about an integrated transport policy later on this afternoon, but as far as eco-friendly transport systems or eco-friendly vehicle systems are concerned, the DETR is constantly involved in trying to update those, as we know only too well from anyone who's involved with vehicles, and they're taking this on board. There's no easy answer to this, but as much as we can do to reduce pollution, we must be doing.
David Davis?
Is it not the case that John Prescott asked us to judge him by getting a reduction in traffic volume on the roads? And is it not the case that traffic volumes have continued to increase and that the only response by the Labour government, the only policy that they seem to have in an integrated transport package is to put taxes onto car parking spaces, to start charging people for using roads in urban and in rural areas, and to increase the taxes on fuel year upon year upon year without offering any sort of alternative in the way of an efficient public transport service?
Well, you might think so, but the point is there is no doubt that John Prescott has made a major impact on the change in the way we look at transport. And I mean, you can't expect things overnight. So millions of pounds are being spent, and this afternoon I've been announcing some very interesting initiatives, some in your constituency, you'll be pleased to know, as far as safe routes to school are concerned. And I know that the DETR, under the control of John Prescott, has in fact is at the present time in Magor, near Newport, holding a particularly pilot scheme as far as local parking in the community is concerned. And we're very fortunate we've got that taking place in Wales. So the DETR are playing their part in Wales on the higher level, and I'm dealing with Wales as far as safe routes to schools and other transport initiatives are concerned. And altogether, working in partnership, John Prescott, myself, this Assembly, Labour control with the Labour government, is a very good deal for Wales as a whole. I'm sure we will agree.
Diolch yn fawr, Peter.
Thank you very much
Point
indeed,
of order,
Peter.
William Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Clowes. I rise on Standing Order 1.9, and I'm aware it is of some sensitivity to you, but I think it is should not pass without comment that a member of another House has called into question your impartiality, particularly at this time when we know it's a testing time for the Assembly. And may I say, in condemning those remarks, assure you that we have the greatest confidence in your ability to handle these matters over the next few days without exception.
Thank you. Further this point of order.
I want to address my remarks to exactly this point of order, Presiding Officer, because I think we would all have seen the comments attributed to members of Parliament representing Welsh constituencies who are not members of this National Assembly, and in an appalling way bringing into question your integrity and impartiality. Can I tell you, Presiding Officer, that I've spoken to many members of all parties of the National Assembly who are truly appalled at these outrageous comments. And can I tell you also that if they are in any way intended to influence members of this National Assembly in our conduct today, they will surely fail.
Jenny Anderson, further to this point of order. Thank you.
Simply endorse what has already been said. I think it is totally out of order for members of another House to comment on your conduct, as it would be for us to comment on the conduct of the Speaker of the House of Commons in our professional official capacity. And to be honest, the remarks were totally unhelpful.
It would not be appropriate for me to comment at any length on this matter. Just to thank members of the Assembly who both publicly here in this chamber and privately in many different ways have expressed their support from all groups within this Assembly. I would like to say merely two things. In the first instance, when I was elected to this post, I considered carefully what my media relations policy should be. And I decided to adopt a policy which I have continued to pursue at some cost to my officials, namely to have an open policy. That this was in the spirit of the new democracy which we are creating together in this Cardiff Bay, and therefore I have generally responded to requests for interviews and to comment on matters which are of relevance to the Assembly. Perhaps my comments are not always as felicitous as they might have been, might be, or should be, but I try to maintain the dignity of the Assembly in those comments. And I do this because we are in new territory. We do not have precedent to turn to. In my rather too long experience in Westminster, it was often the case that speakers that I greatly admired would refer to precedents and therefore would not need to explain their conduct. In this place, we have no precedent. We are without precedent in the history of our country and in the history of the UK. And therefore it's appropriate that we should explain not only for the present but for the future what our intentions are. The other matter refers, of course, to matters said in the United Kingdom Parliament or by members of the UK Parliament relating to our affairs here. I have tried constantly to ensure that this Assembly does not become a surrogate for Westminster in terms of references to by-elections, which may or may not please me, or to general elections when they may happen for Westminster. We are our own people here. This is our Assembly, and long may it be so.
Could I, as someone who shared many of those experiences with you, just say how much I, as an individual, I can't claim to speak for my party on this or any other matter, of course, and I certainly don't want to get involved in the previous controversy. But can I say, as an individual, that the way that you've conducted yourself in office has been exemplary. You've shown, I think, great patience and great tolerance and great understanding in the way that you've developed our own traditions here. And the support which has been expressed for you from the other three political parties is shared, I know, by very many of my own party.
As always, Ron, I'm very grateful to you. We now come to a very important item in our agenda, which is the passage of legislation. And can I thank the Executive for assisting me by placing legislation like this at the top of our agenda, because this is such an important part of our business. So we come to the Milk Development Council Amendment Regulation and the approval of that regulation. I call on the Assembly Secretary for Agriculture to move it. Christine, thank you.
Thank you very much, Llywydd, and I do agree with you on many matters, but also that this is a very, very important piece of legislation. The main purpose of these amending regulations is to empower the MDC, that's the Milk Development Council, to carry out the generic promotion of liquid milk. By this I mean not brand or origin advertising, but the more general promotion of the product. Specifically, the draft order does three things. It provides for the widening of the MDC's statutory remit to include generic promotion. It increases by 0.03 pence per litre the statutory maximum levy, and it clarifies that the levy is exclusive of VAT. The effect of this proposal will be to raise the statutory maximum levy from 0.05 pence per litre to 0.08 pence per litre. Assuming that the full additional charge is levied on milk producers, this is expected to generate an extra £3.5 million per year for the advertising campaign. Voluntary matching funding is being organised by the Dairy Industry Federation, which is putting contractual arrangements in place with its members, and that's the dairy processing companies. This is expected to be completed by the 16th of February. The background to this proposal is a campaign by the industry to halt the decline in liquid milk consumption seen in Great Britain over recent years. Following deregulation of the milk market in 1994, industry-funded generic marketing more or less stopped completely. The industry believes this has contributed to the continuing decline in consumption of liquid milk, and that rate of decline has been about 1% per year for the last 10 years, so it is very, very serious. The proposal is aimed at addressing this decline and has been put forward following the findings of a study commissioned by the MDC to assess the effectiveness of a national generic advertising campaign for liquid milk. The dairy sector, of course, is experiencing very tough times at present. I recognise, therefore, this is not an opportune time, if there ever is, to impose an additional cost on dairy farmers. However, it is important to note that we're doing this at the request of the industry. NFU Cymru Wales and the FUW both support it, as do dairy companies themselves. It is the industry's clear preference that this should be done through a statutory levy and not voluntary contributions. However, I should explain that before bringing forward these legislative proposals, the Assembly, together with MAF and the Scottish Executive, conducted a poll of producers last year to gauge support for the proposal. The outcome was a very clear vote in favour of the proposals, 75% support in Great Britain, and in Wales slightly higher, maybe surprisingly, at 76%. We have discussed this in committee and discussed it very thoroughly, and I am very grateful to the Agriculture and Rural Development Committee for the support for these proposals when we talked about them. The European Commission, in respect of state aid provisions, has also approved the proposal. Therefore, and subject to match funding from the dairy companies, and that's very important that we actually get that, I invite the Assembly to give its strong backing to the proposals by voting in favour of the motion to approve the draft order. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Rhodri Morgan.
As
Christine has noted, this is an exceedingly important legislation as far as the milk industry is concerned, and I think that we should pay tribute to the milk producers, that they at a very difficult time in their history have been prepared to give this financial support. At a time when milk producers on average are losing 4 pence a litre due to the strength of the pound, a time when they are unable to get the compensation that they are owed from Europe because of political decisions based on the repayments and the Fontainebleau Agreement. Our milk producers have chosen to financially support this venture because they realise how important it is to the industry. And I think we should pay tribute to them for being prepared to look forward and to ensure the future of their industry. The industry has discussed this in detail, and we are very supportive indeed to this venture. And may I say that it is very nice to hear that match funding is available for this particular venture.
Peter Rogers.
Thank you very much indeed. I echo those words. I think that it was a very clear message that the dairy farmers set out in their voting, although they are, as we've already heard, in a very desperate state. I think that they're sending out a very firm message that they are going to support this, and I just wish them all the very best, and I hope that we'll really support milk produce for Wales. Thank you.
And Mick Bates.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the Liberal Democrats welcome this move, particularly as it's a venture that looks to the future to actually sell more Welsh produce. We do, however, regret that there isn't enough pressure applied to gain agri-money compensation. We feel that the industry, as Rhodri has told you, losing 4 pence a litre, needs extra support from this Assembly. So we look forward to further pressure from the Agricultural Secretary to gain agri-money compensation from Europe. Selling milk, of course, is something that we all wish to achieve here. And I'm very grateful for those members who signed my statement of opinion to get school milk. And I'm sure you will offer support to the dairy industry by lobbying your local authorities to get more milk into school. So we all must look to the future. Welcome this and welcome the farmers' commitment. Let's show them ours as well. Thank you.
Christine, do you wish to reply to the debate, or just move the order?
I just want to thank members for their contribution. As I said, we did discuss this quite thoroughly in committee, and I would echo the words that dairy farmers are showing confidence in their own future, and we really, really have to applaud that and do our best for them as well. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr, Christine. Felly, galw pleidlais.
Thank you very much, Christine. Therefore, I call for a vote. This is the first vote today. Please ensure that your cards are inserted.
Make sure that your cards are inserted properly. There may be other votes to follow.
I call for a vote on the motion to approve the Milk Development Order, the Milk Development Council Amendment Order 2000.
Agor y bleidlais.
Open the vote.
Caer y pleidlais.
Close the vote.
O blaid 59.
For 59. Abstain none.
Yn erbyn.
Against none.
Cyfanswm 59.
Total 59. Therefore, the order has been carried.
Yr eitem nesaf ar yr agenda.
The next item on the agenda
yw cynnig o ddiffyg hyder
is a motion of no confidence in the first secretary,
wedi gyflwyno gan
tabled by members of the three opposition groups. I shall follow the procedure used in the previous confidence motion, no confidence motion, and as previously indicated, I shall allow a maximum of 10 minutes for each party spokesperson to speak before calling on the first secretary to reply.
Mr Llywydd, the reason why we are tabling this motion of lack of confidence in the First Secretary is a fairly simple one. The First Secretary has failed on a matter which is of crucial importance to Wales, assuring us that Wales is able to benefit fully from Objective 1 funding. It must also be noted here that it is a case of breaking a promise made by the Labour Party. Tony Blair said after the Berlin summit that Wales would get £1.2 billion of European funding. And then 2 nights before the Assembly elections in May last year, the First Secretary, Alun Michael, acknowledged in a televised debate that no money had been set aside for the first year of the programme. We in Plaid Cymru have made it absolutely clear from the outset that we consider Objective 1 funding to be a matter of confidence in the First Secretary. After all, the First Secretary has had between May last year and February, this February, to ensure that there is adequate provision for Objective 1 funding in this year's budget. Wales cannot continue to live in hope that there is more funding around some corner. The time has come for the government to put the money on the table. Let us remind ourselves why we in Plaid Cymru, ever since Objective 1 status was announced, have placed so much importance on the fact that Cymru must get every penny it is owed. Objective 1 status was given to the rural counties in the west and the industrial valleys of Glamorgan and Gwent because those areas were recognised as being amongst the poorest regions of Europe. Ensuring that Wales is able to take full advantage of promoting the economy of those areas is one of the most important political issues of the day. This is a central part of the Assembly's most important task, ensuring a fairer and more prosperous society in Wales, and of course, to ensure that wealth is distributed more equitably. That is why we as a party went out of our way to afford the government one opportunity after another to ensure Objective 1 funding for us. Although we are extremely disappointed with several aspects of the government's work, we as a party were determined to give them every opportunity to get hold of to find this money. Obtaining the funding and ensuring a fair opportunity to Wales came before any other party political interests we had. This failure, therefore, means that we can no longer have confidence in the First Secretary to look after the interests of Wales. Things can't carry on like this. Such is our concern about the future of the Assembly under the leadership of the present First Secretary. We have come to the conclusion that this Assembly must have a fresh start.
In proposing this vote of no confidence in the First Secretary, no one can accuse us of not giving him or the Executive in the Assembly ample warning of what was expected of them. We have made it clear all along that delivering on Objective 1 was an issue of confidence in the First Secretary himself. After all, securing our full share of European structural funds is vital if the National Assembly is to have any chance of making a real difference in Wales. A sum of £340 million each year for the next 7 years above our fixed budget would do an enormous difference to the lives of people living in West Wales and the valleys. These areas are regarded as amongst the poorest in Europe. After all, why are we here in this Assembly? Isn't it in order to improve the economic prospects of the people of Wales, to provide them with good quality, sustainable jobs? And don't many of us still believe in the good old-fashioned socialist principle of spreading prosperity throughout our country? Objective 1 gives us a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do just that. Let's remind ourselves once again of the two reasonable demands we made to the First Secretary in my letter to him of the 20th of January. Firstly, a guarantee that the £1.2 billion allocated to Wales by the European Union would be over and above the government money for general public spending. Unless this European money is guaranteed in full, in addition to the Barnett formula, there simply isn't any point in awarding Objective 1 status to Wales. All we needed was a letter from the Treasury accepting that fundamental principle. And secondly, an adequate sum to cover both the European element and the matched funding to be included in this year's budget, a sum we calculated at a reasonable figure of £85 million. As we have made it clear before, there is not a single penny, or as David Wigley eloquently put it, not a brass farthing extra in the budget approved yesterday to cover expenditure under Objective 1. And surely the sum of 85 million is not unreasonable when one considers that Gordon Brown has a war chest of at least 7 billion and could be as well as high as 12 billion. And let us clear up another matter. We've been told that... I'm not giving way. We have been told...
Order. It is clear in our standing orders. It is up to the Assembly member speaking whether or not she chooses to give way. They even adopt this practice in Westminster, I'm told. Yeah.
We were told that we have fixed an artificial date. Now, the assurance had to be given by the 8th of February because that is the date by which we needed to approve our budget. It wasn't a date chosen by us. It was chosen by the First Secretary and the Executive themselves. Not only did we earnestly hope that the First Secretary would have been successful in meeting our two key demands, we did everything we could to help him secure those necessary funds. We cooperated in every possible way to secure the best for Wales. His failure, however, to deliver on that issue means that a majority in this Assembly has lost confidence in him. And I regret to say this, he has failed the big test of his leadership in the National Assembly. And now we know the worth of Tony Blair's claim that he would not let the people of Wales down. We have seen it for what it really is, another meaningless phrase, like so many of New Labour's soundbites. We were told that the First Secretary has access to ministers. Sadly, he doesn't have access to their checkbooks. This Assembly needs an executive that will stand up for Wales, to show determination and purpose in discussions with the Treasury in the next few months, and a First Secretary who will have the bottle to challenge Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, even when they say no. In the best interests of Wales, I now invite my fellow members to support this motion.
Nick Bourne.
Llywydd. The Welsh Conservatives proposed a motion of no confidence in the First Secretary previously. We then stood alone. We always doubted how bankable Tony Blair's promise, "I will not let Wales down," would be. Now we know for sure. Our budget date and no extra funds. Not an extra penny piece from Westminster for Objective 1 projects. As we always thought, as we always said, as we always warned. The First Secretary's problem is obvious. He is where he is because he is Tony Blair's man. He wanted him there because he would not cause trouble, or at least not intentionally. That backfired. He was put there, though, because he would do London's bidding. The First Secretary, alas, gives the impression that he would do what London tells him. Plucked from the Home Office, where it was obvious he was happy, to head an institution he had expressed no desire in serving. An institution which, in a telling phrase, which I've seen somewhere recently, risks being the sub-office of London government in Wales rather than the hub of Welsh government in Cardiff, because of the way things are being run by this administration and by this First Secretary. The First Secretary gives the impression that Tony Blair has only to say jump, and the First Secretary responds, how high? Wales needs someone to fight for these vital match funds from Westminster so that we can then ensure worthwhile projects come forward, rather than a government that sits on its hands, does nothing, fiddles while Wales burns. We need a national crusade. I'm not giving way to any political opponents, I'm sorry. That sits on its hands, does nothing, fiddles while Wales burns. We need a national crusade to make the best of Objective 1. Full use, maximum benefit, not some half-hearted hole in the corner, clandestine exercise that begins to look more like an official secret than a policy to be shouted from the rooftops. For a party that purports to believe in freedom of information, the Labour Party seems very keen to bury the details of Objective 1. Why is it the highest level of official secret for this Labour administration? Why? So there are no demands for funds, but Wales is the loser. Today, all that can change, and it needs to change, and quickly. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Wales. It will not come this way again. If this motion is passed, as I believe it will be, the Labour group here needs to think carefully about how to respond. One thing it should not do, one thing it cannot rightly do, one thing it must not do, it must not renominate Alun Michael. I think that it was wrong for the First Secretary not to respond to the vote of censure against his Agriculture Secretary by appointing somebody else. I think it was arrogant, high-handed and unwise, but it was different from today. Today we are talking of an appointment made by this National Assembly, not by the Labour Party, not by the Labour leader. Members of the Labour Cabinet are appointed by the First Secretary. The First Secretary is appointed by this body, by this Assembly, by all of us. It would be anti-democratic in the extreme to put forward the same name again, and it would be unwise. It would start a game of political ping-pong, and this Assembly and Wales would be the loser. But let me make this clear. My party will not blink. We will continue to do what is necessary to ensure that somebody heads this administration who is going to put up more of a fight at Westminster for the funds that are necessary. To believe that the First Secretary can go on with this administration, his reputation in tatters, his credibility in shreds, the government he heads in total disarray, would be a massive mistake. Lurching from crisis to crisis while Wales bleeds would be on a par with believing that waiting lists are coming down, that the earth is flat, or that the moon is made of green cheese. Today we have an opportunity to change things. A decisive act in the National Assembly today can now ensure that Objective 1 funding is given the prominence it deserves, the funds it needs for the nation which we are here to serve.
Mike German.
You know, Mr. Llywydd, the world of politics can be unreal. The media world off which it feeds is little closer to reality. You only have to look outside this chamber, but still within this building, to recognise the frenzy of today's events. The prospect of change, fallen heroes, and rising stars, has created a buzz, a frisson, an energy, which, if we're all honest with ourselves, we find compelling. But all this leaves real people cold. The people out there beyond this building who elected us, and particularly those who didn't. Real people are looking down on us, all of us, with disdain. What they see taking place in this Assembly has little obvious relevance to their lives. They see our actions as games, and we were not elected to play games. They are right. And in this debate, we would all do well to remember the real people of Wales, the people who elected us, and the people who didn't turn out to vote at all. For this debate is serious. In our short lifetime, we've had no more serious a debate. There's a lot at stake. For you, Alun, for others in this chamber, for the Assembly as a whole, for devolution itself, and for the people of Wales. The most obvious and personal decision we are taking today affects the career of one man, a good man, a principled man, a person who could work no harder, who has a genuine commitment to devolution, to social justice, and to democracy. Now, real people are fond of saying that all politicians are the same. They're self-serving, two-faced, unprincipled. They do anything for a vote, they say. In this instance, they are wrong. There are many good, principled people who enter politics to do public service, and Alun Michael is one of these people. But we are not here to debate our First Secretary's character or his principles. Despite our presiding officer's comments some months ago that there are no honourable gentlemen here, we can safely assume that he's wrong for people in this chamber. But we are not character witnesses. We are policy makers and decision takers. Most importantly of all, we are representatives who owe our positions to the people who elected us, who pay our salaries and who place their hopes in us. In 3 years' time, these same people will have the opportunity to hold us to account for our actions, for our policies and for our decisions. And they will expect us to have done our best to hold the executive and the First Secretary in particular to account for the decisions they have taken. That is what today's debate is about, the very simple and basic democratic principle of accountability. Now, during the election campaign last April and May, you, Alan, David Wigley, Rod Richards, my goodness how times have changed, and I repeatedly met in television and radio studios to debate the election issues. Time and again I said how important it was that Wales should receive the full matched funding so we could draw down all the Objective 1 money. Time and again I emphasised how important it was that such match funding should be in addition to the Welsh block grant. Again and again, you, Alan, were asked if this money would be available and when it would become available. In the last week of the campaign, Alun Michael answered the question. He said it would be subject to the Westminster Government's comprehensive spending review. In other words, there would be no additional match funding until the spring of 2001. There was a row, as often is in the heat of an election. Liberal Democrats, together with Plaid Cymru and the Conservatives, said this just was not good enough. A better commitment was needed, and it was needed early. So our mandate is clear. I fought the election and was elected by the people of South East Wales to fight for match funding this year. Today's debate and the vote which will follow is an opportunity to fulfil this mandate. And so it is for the First Secretary, for it is the will of this Assembly that we should have the matched funding. We are agreed that the Objective 1 opportunity is the biggest facing Wales. We all know we will not get another such opportunity to boost the prosperity of West Wales and the valleys. We all acknowledge that there could be more money available to us in the next 7 years than we will ever see again from the European Union. We have debated the matter endlessly. We've taken it apart and rebuilt it in the committees and at question time. The result has always been the same. The majority in this Assembly has demanded a commitment from the Treasury to provide the match funding this year. And the majority in this Assembly has demanded that our First Secretary take the fight to the Treasury. His mandate was clear, and he has failed. In place of the cast iron assurance that Wales requires, we've had spin, stalling and sleight of hand. Roedd e'n gwybod yn iawn beth oedd roedd iddo fe gwneud,
what he had to do, and he hasn't done so. People in the valleys in West Wales, real people, and he has failed to give them what they need. Their jobs, their education, and their future. They are in the balance.
There are people in the valleys and in West Wales, real people, who he has failed. It is their jobs, their education and training, and their environment at stake. It is on these people's behalf that we are holding this debate. It is for them that we are holding the First Secretary to account. Not just for the failure to deliver the match funding, as if this were not enough, but the failure to deliver for the Assembly, and for the failure to deliver for the very principle of devolution itself. Because the Objective 1 issue is just the most potent and powerful symbol of the minority administration's failings. Its failings to deliver the principles of devolution. Its failing to fight for Welsh solutions to Welsh problems. To excuse the lack of a firm commitment on the match funding by pointing to the Westminster Government's comprehensive spending review timetable is to take the side of that of Westminster, not the side of the Assembly. July may be a date which suits the Chancellor's plans, but it does not suit this Assembly. There are other examples. The ban on beef on the bone was lifted in line with London's lead, not Wales's lead. The performance-related pay scheme for teachers is being manoeuvred to match England's, not the ideas and principles agreed by this Assembly's Education Committee. To the people who pay only a passing interest in the Assembly's affairs, the real people, The response to these decisions is, what's the point? Why have devolution if there isn't the courage to stand up for Wales when Welsh solutions should be different to England's? You, Alun, have often referred to this Assembly as a fragile institution. You're right. It was born of a narrow majority. It was elected on a low turnout. And it's been granted only limited powers. Now, there are two ways to care for such fragility in an infant. It can be cosseted and fussed over, kept inside and protected to the exclusion of all the dangers found in the rough and tough of the real world. Or you can open the windows and let the air in, experience the vitality and excitement of life outside, and encourage growth and strength under a watchful eye. The Labour minority administration here has made the wrong choice. It has avoided risk, taken the cautious options, erred towards safety, and the result has been unexciting, underwhelming and uninspiring. We have got to change. We must be seen to change, and we must start with a change of leadership. We must go back to some of the themes on which we fought the election. Indeed, we should return to the spirit of the referendum. The Liberal Democrats, Plaid Cymru and Labour all campaigned for a new politics. Our expectations were high, but they weren't unattainable. We must try again. There is good that we can build on. There is some good cooperative and progressive work being carried out in the committees. On so many issues, it is not difficult to find a consensus. Liberal Democrats, Labour and Plaid Cymru, all of us are committed to social justice. All of us are committed to building a more self-reliant economy in which there are jobs for people in every community. We are committed to tackling poverty and lack of opportunity. We are all determined to invest and rebuild our public services, our schools, our colleges, health services and transport systems. In debate after debate, we can find more that unites us than divides us. We have just taken a few small steps before the creation of a government built upon a genuine principled partnership of power. Such a government would be prepared to stand up for Wales against the interests of Whitehall. It would be prepared to argue the case for extra powers where the need is identified. And it would be based on a greater openness of decision-making and on a sharing of power, not just between the parties, but between executive and committees, between assembly secretaries and other AMs, between the centre and the regions, and most important of all, between the Assembly and the people of Wales. We can do it. We can make a difference. We can recover lost ground. But we cannot do it with a First Secretary who has lost the confidence of the people of Wales. So, for the real people of the South Wales valleys, and of the west and the north of our country, for the future credibility of the Assembly itself, for the very principle of devolution, Alun, we ask you to go.
Prifysgrifennydd y Cynulliad, Alun Michael.
Assembly First Secretary Alun Michael.
Mr. Llywydd, I've listened carefully to the criticisms made against my leadership. I've listened and I'm pleased to have the opportunity to respond directly. I almost say at last. The last few weeks have been a frustrating time for the administration. The atmosphere of uncertainty has made it difficult for people to get on with the job that we're here to do, which is to build a better future for the people of Wales. So I'm glad we can take this issue head on, and I hope that once we've done so, the Assembly can get back to the serious work we were elected to carry out. Ieuan's demands were set out clearly in a letter that he sent to me and published and refuted in my response. The 8th of February is an artificial deadline, Ieuan, because the cash is in this year's budget adequately and in full. I reject this motion because it's based on a deception. It's based on a false premise, the suggestion that I've failed to deliver. And Plaid Cymru know full well that it's a false premise. May I say to Ieuan Wyn Jones
that the Labour Party has kept its promises, and the Labour Party in future will keep its promises. It is the Labour Party that actually won Objective 1 for Wales, and it is the Labour Party that will give the opportunity through Objective 1 to individuals and communities throughout Wales.
You see, I haven't failed to deliver. I've delivered and I will deliver. I have every confidence that in July, at the end of the negotiating process that is currently underway with the Treasury, we will deliver in full the money that is due to the people in Wales, the money that the Labour government secured for the people of Wales. And I already have delivered the extra money needed in the financial year which started in April. We made all this clear yesterday in the budget. The earliest Objective 1 can start under the European Commission's timetable is April this year. And the 35 million extra I got into the budget is there. For future years, let me say once more, we're in the middle of a process which has not reached its completion. You may not like the process or the timescale, but to call a vote of no confidence now is like accusing a long-distance runner of losing the race when he's 3/4 of the way through that race and way ahead of all the other runners. The race isn't finished yet. By all means, make the judgment when the race is run. But now, believe me, we are ahead of other areas in the United Kingdom. We're ahead of other countries. This resolution is playing games with the poorest communities, with the weakest economies in Wales. I listened to Nick Bourne. Yes, he was the first to table a cynical motion of no confidence, and his cynicism in tabling a motion on this topic, in supporting a motion on this topic, was refuted from just behind him by the ex-minister, Rod Richards. The threat, Nick, to this Assembly is not from someone like myself, who has supported the idea of an elected Assembly for Wales for over 30 years, but those whose party has never supported an elected Assembly for Wales. Mike German was absolutely right about the way that this leaves people cold outside this Assembly, the irrelevance of these games to the lives of ordinary people. But I am disappointed that in saying some things that make sense, Mike also talked down our successes in finding Welsh solutions to Welsh problems in this chamber. And think back to the previous challenges. The cynical challenge from Plaid Cymru to Ron Davies that he wouldn't deliver Objective 1, that Labour wouldn't deliver Objective 1. Crate of champagne was promised if that unlikely outcome was to be fulfilled. Now, let's take it back to the real challenge. I promised by the real deadline in July we would deliver for the people of Wales. I wouldn't be doing this job if I didn't believe that. And if it didn't deliver, then would be the time for me to consider my position. Then would be the time for this Assembly to pass a judgment. Not today, not at a time of Plaid Cymru's choosing, an arbitrary deadline plucked out of thin air to distract attention from their own internal party squabbling. For what else do they hope to achieve by this motion today? Do they seriously believe that by removing me from office they'll strengthen our position with the Treasury? Do they really think Gordon Brown is more likely to listen to someone else put in place, not by the Labour Party but by the opposition? That the Iron Chancellor is going to abandon all previous precedent and suddenly cave in to Plaid Cymru's blackmail? That a different leader should somehow click their fingers and Objective 1 money would start falling out of the sky? It's not real and it's not going to happen. And if they think the Labour Party is going to let other parties dictate its choice of leader for the Assembly, their judgment is even more off-beam than I thought. It's not the Labour Party that's going to allow that to happen. But we must all face to the reality of our position here. Labour is a minority administration. We're dependent on the support of other parties. That's why I and my colleagues have sought to put forward clear policies with confidence, but to engage and seek agreement on the key issues from all parties. And let's reflect for a moment on what we have achieved since the transfer of power 6 months ago. Cross-party agreement on the establishment of a Children's Commissioner to promote the rights and interests of children and young people in Wales. A radical new structure for post-16 education and training, something that will truly meet the needs of young people and employers in this country. A new approach to involving young people through Young Voice Llais-Ifanc, and also proposals for a new youth service. A local government settlement acknowledged by many in local government as the best for years. The first export contract anywhere in the UK to get our beef back into Europe after the lifting of the export ban. New jobs like the 600 announced on Monday in Pembroke Dock. And people talk about the need for inclusive politics. We've agreed a budget which took on board 31 out of the 33 subject committee recommendations. I call that inclusive politics. We've invited the other parties to help us develop an ambitious corporate plan for the Assembly, as well as consulting groups and organisations across Wales. That's inclusive politics. And we're making unanimous representations to the UK government to tackle the crisis in agriculture, taking full account of the views of other parties. That is inclusive politics. So we've made enormous progress despite the difficulties, and I'm committed to working with the other parties to find ways forward on which we can all agree. If that means developing new structures to help us resolve our difficulties and negotiate progress, we must accept that challenge, and I've proved my willingness to do so. But let nobody think that there's a magic wand which will suddenly solve the problems we face in Wales. Things won't change overnight. It is going to take time for us to put in place the building blocks we need to effect real change to people's lives. Whether it's through European programmes or new youth support services or ways of tackling social inclusion, it all takes time, and time to grow a new institution to maturity. Today's motion puts all of that at risk. I hope that after today's debate we can make a fresh start. We should build on the successes of the first 6 months, recognise that there is room for improvement, and work together with a renewed determination in the interests of Wales. In the past few days, with the national media covering our affairs, Plaid Cymru's agenda has unravelled. They're now exposed. They want to wrestle credit from the Labour Party for Objective 1, a credit which we were happy to share with those who would work with us to transform our poorest economies, and to care nothing for the damage done to the Assembly in the process. It's clearly the intention to have a no-confidence vote today and another as early as tomorrow. And I have to say that in my personal view, it would be intolerable and unacceptable to face any First Secretary, whether immediately coming to office after an election or after a resignation or after any other set of circumstances, with such an immediate challenge. Coming to the heart of today's challenge, it is also unacceptable for any party to be faced with others seeking to change its leader. I would have no truck with trying to change the leader of another party. I believe in party loyalty for others as much as I do for my own party. A repeated ping-pong would see my colleagues in the Labour group, and this is the intention, the colleagues in the Labour group who have shown enormous unity and purpose over several trying months, torn between their loyalty to the Labour Party and their passionate will to make the Assembly work. It cannot be right for Plaid Cymru to choose who leads Labour, nor is it right for the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats to connive with that purpose. That's why I've decided to put the choice back clearly with the Labour Party by resigning as First Secretary with immediate effect. Here is that resignation in writing as required under standing orders. It is for the Labour Party, my colleagues in the Assembly Labour Group and the representatives of the wider party to decide who shall be presented to this Assembly as our candidate for the role of First Secretary. And that is why, Mr Llywydd, I formally and in writing as required by standing orders present you with my resignation as First Secretary. Clearly that requires wider thought and consideration than an automatic renomination, but I believe that is in the interest of this Assembly, and I have from the beginning sought to serve the interests of this Assembly, and it's in the interests, the wider interests of the wider Labour Party, which I have also sought to serve throughout my political career. And it's with that in mind that I suggest that the Assembly keeps to the normal practice by reconvening next Tuesday. As the largest party in this Assembly, the Labour Party has taken responsibility, even without a majority, to lead this Assembly to success, just as we in a Labour government gave the opportunity of the Assembly to the people of Wales. Labour, in its decisions, will not let Wales down. Welsh Labour will not let down this new National Assembly for Wales. It won't let it down now or in the future. I wish I could say the same for other parties, and I ask each of them to reflect now on what they have done and on their responsibilities for the future, their responsibilities to the National Assembly for Wales, their responsibilities to Wales.
Thank you, Assembly First Secretary. Since I have had no indication from the mover of the motion that he intends to withdraw the motion, we now move to a vote. On a point of order arising from the motion.
I don't care where it comes from, Llywydd.
I'm sorry, I'm afraid I have to care where it comes from.
In an office that has just been vacated. For heaven's sake, this is enough. This is enough.
Order. I have business to transact and I will do so orderly. We now move to a vote. Agor y bleidlais. There's no point of clarification. We now move to a vote. Is this on a point of order? 2.9.
There is no one here as the secretary, as the first secretary.
The motion on the order paper has not been withdrawn. Symud I bleidlais.
We move to a vote.
Caer bleidlais.
Close the vote.
O blaid y cynnig
31. 31.
Ymatal 1.
Abstain 1.
Yn erbyn 27.
Against 27. Total 59. Therefore, the motion is carried.
Gai felly ofyn am gynnig.
May I therefore ask for a motion that this assembly rises for an hour so that we may return to discuss the situation further.
I therefore invite the Business Secretary to propose a procedural motion at S06.16 to seek an adjournment of this plenary session for 1 hour, following which the clerk would ring the bell. Andrew Davis.
Mr. Presiding Officer, with your permission, I would seek to withdraw the motion for the transport debate and come forward in my business statement next week with a new date following discussions in Business Committee for when the debate can take place, and also to move a procedural motion under Standing Order 6.10 to postpone the debate to approve the planning guidance until a later date.
I'm grateful to the Business Secretary. The Assembly is adjourned for 1 hour. Mae'r cynulliad wedi I ohirio am awr.
The Assembly has been adjourned for 1 hour.
Good afternoon once again. I call the National Assembly for Wales to order. I have received a letter of resignation from the First Secretary, and I want to call on Andrew Davis, the Business Secretary, to discuss the Cabinet meeting.
I'm sorry, we are in the process of business. I've just called him, Andrew Davis. Order, I've just called the business manager, Andrew Davis, to address the Assembly. Andrew Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer. Under Standing Order 2.10, following the resignation of Alun Michael as First Secretary, the Assembly Cabinet met and elected Rhodri Morgan unanimously to chair its meetings and discharge the First Secretary's responsibilities until the Assembly elects a new First Secretary.
Thank you. I think it would then be appropriate for me to call the Acting First Secretary to make a statement to the Assembly.
May I call on the Acting First Secretary to make a statement to the Assembly?
This will, I hope, be very short and sweet. It's simply to say that the Cabinet has decided to convene the Assembly together for an extraordinary meeting at 9:30 a.m. tomorrow morning. There.
Any other member wishing?
On that point, yes, on that point, I take that to be a formal request to me to, under 6.2, to recall the Assembly. So the point of order, Jocelyn Davis.
What are the businesses for tomorrow if we're to be recalled?
I'm sorry if I didn't make myself sufficiently clear on this point. It is to consider the issue of how to fill the vacancy left by the resignation of the First Secretary. Any other clarifications required? I presume, that means that the vote for First Secretary. Nomination, the call for the nomination of the First Secretary. Yeah, well, I mean...
I'm afraid if I may indicate that the election of the First Secretary, the nomination of the First Secretary, is a responsibility for the presiding officer. Of course, I will consider any views expressed to the Assembly, but under 2.2, it is for me to invite nominations. And I haven't yet decided to do so, clearly, but I will have regard to the views of the Assembly, which will be expressed when we reconvene tomorrow. Dyna ddiwedd y cyfarfod.
That is the end of today's meeting. Thank you for your forbearance.